In today's video, I'll be doing a walkthrough of SAT Practice Test 5's reading section. I've scored 1590 on the SAT, and as I go through this practice test, I'm going to show you some of the tips, tricks, and strategies that I use to score 1590. So with all that being said, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and let's go ahead and get started. Questions 1 through 10 are based on the following passage. This passage is adopted from William Maxwell, The Folded Leaf, copyright 1959 by William Maxwell, originally published in 1945. The Alcazar restaurant was on Sheridan Road near Devon Avenue. It was long and narrow with tables for 2 along the walls and tables for 4 down the middle. The decoration was art moderne, except for the series of murals depicting the 4 seasons and the sick ferns in the front window. Limey sat down at the second table from the cash register and ordered his dinner. The history book which he propped against the catsup in the glass sugar bowl had been used by others before him. Blank pages, front and back, were filled in with maps, drawings, dates, comic cartoons, and organs of the body. Also with names and messages no longer clear and never absolutely legible. On nearly every other page, there was some marginal notation, either in ink or in very hard pencil. And unless someone had upset a glass of water, the marks on page 177 were from tears. While Limey read about the Peace of Paris signed on the 13th of May, 1814, between France and the Allied powers, his right hand managed again and again to bring food up to his mouth. Sometimes he chewed, sometimes he swallowed whole the food that he had no idea he was eating. The Congress of Vienna met, with some allowance for delays, early in November of the same year, and all the powers engaged in the war on either side sent plenipotentiaries. It was by far the most splendid and important assembly ever convoked to discuss and determine the affairs of Europe. The Emperor of Russia, the King of Prussia, the King of Bavaria, Denmark, and Württemberg all were present in person at the court of the Emperor Francis I in the Austrian capital. When Limey put down his fork and began to count them off, one by one on the fingers of his left hand, the waitress, whose name was Irma, thought he was through eating and tried to take his plate away. He stopped her. Prince Metternich, his right thumb, presided over the Congress, and the Prince Talleyrand, the index finger, represented France. A party of 4, 2 men and 2 women, came into the restaurant, all talking at once, and took possession of the center table nearest Limey. The woman had shingled hair and short, tight skirts, which exposed the underside of their knees when they sat down. One of the women had the face of a young boy, but disguised by one trick or another, rouge, lipstick, powder, wet bangs plastered against the high forehead, and a pair of long pendant earrings to look like a woman of 35, which as a matter of fact she was. The men were older. They laughed more than there seemed any occasion for, while they were deciding between soup and shrimp cocktail, and their laughter was too loud. But it was the women's voices, the terrible, not quite sober pitch of the women's voices, which caused Limey to skim over 2 whole pages without knowing what was on them. Fortunately, he realized this and went back. Otherwise, he might never have known about the secret treaty concluded between England, France, and Austria, when the pretensions of Prussia and Russia acting in concert seemed to threaten a renewal of attack. The results of the Congress were stated clearly at the bottom of page 67 and at the top of page 68. But before Limey got halfway through them, a coat that he recognized as his father's was hung on the hook next to his chair. Limey closed the book and said, I didn't think you were coming. Time is probably no more unkind to sporting characters than it is to other people, but physical decay unsustained by respectability is somehow more noticeable. Mr. Peters' hair was turning gray, and his scalp showed through on top. He had lost weight also. He no longer filled out his clothes the way he used to. His color was poor, and the flower had disappeared from his buttonhole. In its place was an American Legion button. Apparently, he himself was not aware that there had been any change. He straightened his tie self-consciously, and when Irma handed him a menu, he gestured with it so that the 2 women at the next table would notice the diamond ring on the 4th finger of his right hand. Both of these things, and also the fact that his hands showed signs of manicurus, one can blame on the young man who had his picture taken with a derby hat on the back of his head, and also sitting with a girl on the curve of the moon. The young man had never for 1 second deserted Mr. Peters. He was always there, tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not becoming of a man of 45. All right, now that we've read through the passage, let's go ahead and answer the questions. So we have over the course of the passage, the primary focus shifts from what? Well, we know in the beginning of the passage, what we're really talking about is Limey and his reading of the book, right? If we take a look at our answer choices, we can look for something that starts with that. But then what we're ultimately going to want to end with is Limey talking about the people who enter the restaurant. So we have that group of 4 people, 2 guys and 2 girls, and also Limey's father. So we'll look for an answer choice that matches that. We have option A, Limey's inner thoughts, 2 observations made by other characters. We don't start out with Limey's inner thoughts, okay? So that's an issue there. And then also, other characters never make observations. Limey makes observations about the other characters, but the other characters never make observations about each other. So A is incorrect there. Next, we have B, an exchange between strangers to a satisfying personal relationship. Well, we don't start with an exchange between strangers, right? That's not our primary focus in the beginning, so that's going to be incorrect. C, the physical setting of the scene. This is too narrow, okay? This focuses in too narrow on that first paragraph, okay? Obviously, in this first paragraph, are we describing the setting? Yes, but is that the main focus there? No. Also, it's not the main focus
of, that first half, right? It's only the first paragraph. In this case, we're really splitting up that primary focus into two parts, right? Obviously, we're splitting it by 2 here, okay? If I go and highlight that, you can see it, okay? We're shifting, okay? So if we're splitting this into the 2 parts, saying a physical setting of the scene as a whole first half of that, that's just focusing in too narrow on that first paragraph. And then we have option D, Limey's experience of reading the book, right? We see pretty much all the way up to, I believe it was, right here, okay? All the way up to this star, which I'll go ahead and highlight. All the way up to here, we're talking about Limey's experience reading the book, okay? And then after that, we shift into his discussion of the characters. So we see it's really pretty evenly split half and half there. And our answer there is going to end up being answer choice D. All right, moving on to question number 2 now. We have the main purpose of the first paragraph is to what? Well, we kind of already discussed this, right? In this first paragraph, we're describing the setting. Okay, we go through, and I'll go ahead and highlight this as well. We go through, we talk about the walls, the tables, the decorations, all describing the restaurant. And then when we get to this part here, which I'm going to highlight in green, we start talking about the history book, right? The history book, he starts describing it, talking about its pages, all the markings in it, right? Everything written in the margins, some of it not being legible. So as we can see in that first paragraph, it's really all about description of the restaurant and then about the history book. So if we find an answer choice that matches that, we have option A, introduce the passage's main character by showing his nightly habits. No, we're not showing his nightly habits. B, indicate the date the passage takes place by presenting period details. Also incorrect. And then C, convey the passage's setting by describing a place, which is the restaurant, and an object, which is the book. Okay, that's perfect. We're conveying that setting through that description. And then we have option D, foreshadow an event that is described in detail later in the passage. We're not foreshadowing any sort of event there, so our answer will be C. Number 3, it can be reasonably inferred that Irma, the waitress, thinks Limey is through eating in line 37 because of what? Well, if we go to line 37, it's pretty clear to see, right? And we'll start at the beginning of the sentence here. We have, when Limey put down his fork and began to count them off one by one on the fingers of his left hand, the waitress, whose name was Irma, thought he was through eating. So what's causing her to think he was through eating? Well, that's that he put down his fork. Okay, that's really clear evidence there. So our answer there is that he put down his fork. So if you find that as an answer choice, we see answer choice C. He is no longer holding his fork. All right, number 4, Limey's primary impression of the party of 4 is that they are what? Well, that's going to be that they're noisy and distracting. How do we know that? Well, you should know it just from reading through, right? That was kind of a big theme there, is that they were noisy and distracting. But if you want evidence for it, which we have to get anyways, because that's the next question, I'll go ahead and show you that as well. Okay, we know that Limey said the woman's voices caused him to skim 2 whole pages without knowing what was on them. And I'll highlight this in green so you can see it clearly. So green at the bottom right of your screen here. We have, but it was the woman's voices, the terrible, not quite sober pitch of the woman's voices, which caused Limey to skim over 2 whole pages without knowing what was on them. So that's going to be 55 to 59 as our evidence there. Now keep in mind, because Limey's skipping 2 pages without knowing what's on them, that's showing that they are distracting, and then also showing that they're noisy, right? What caused them to be distracted? That would be their loud voices. So that's showing they're noisy as well. All right, so we've got our answers for 4 and 5. Let's go and move to number 6. The narrator indicates that Limey finally closes his history book because what? Well, we know that this occurs ultimately when his father joins him, and I'll go ahead and show you this as well by highlighting this in blue. We'll do. Okay, right? We know that when Mr. Peters comes, we see Limey sees his father's coat hung next to the chair, and then because he sees that coat gets hung next to the chair, that's what ultimately causes him to close the book. Okay, so obviously then our answer there has got to be his father's arrival. Okay, so his father joined him at the table, answer choice A. The primary impression created by the narrator's description of Mr. Peters in lines 74 to 79 is that he is what? Well, that's not that he's healthy and fit, or angry and menacing, or nervous and hesitant. It's that he's aging and shriveled, right? And I'll go ahead and show you the evidence for that as well. Okay, it's when we talk about time is probably no more unkind to sporting characters than it is to other people, but physical decay unsustained by respectability is somehow more noticeable. Then we talk about Mr. Peters' hair turning gray, his scalp showed through on top, he lost weight, his color was poor. So as we can see, clearly signs of aging there. Okay, so our answer for number 7 would be D. Number 8, the main idea of the last paragraph is that Mr. Peters what? Well, in that last paragraph, we're really describing how Mr. Peters acts like he's much younger than he is, right? And I'll go ahead and highlight some of this in yellow so you can see this. We have apparently he was not aware there had been any change. That's describing, his change in age. He straightened his tie self-consciously. It's showing that he gestured to the 2 women next to him. The diamond ring on the 4th finger of his right hand, indicating he thought that they may be interested in him, which would be typical if he was younger. And then we have, he also, let's see, we've got the young man never once deserted. He was always there tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not becoming of a man of 45, making him do things that were typical of a man younger. Therefore, Mr. Peters doesn't act like he's old. He tries to act younger than he really is. Okay, so main idea of that last paragraph would be something along the lines of that. We have option A, neglects to spend time with family members. That's not the main idea here, so answer choice A is incorrect. B, behaves as if he is a younger version of himself. Yes, okay. He behaves as, he does behaviors that are not typical of a man who is 45. Okay, and then options C and D we see obviously don't really make sense. C saying is very conscious of symbols of wealth and power. That's not true. You could argue that Mr. Peters likes attention, but it's not that he's very conscious of symbols of wealth and power. And then D is preoccupied with the knowledge he's getting old. He actually acts the opposite. He acts like he is not preoccupied at all with the knowledge he's getting old. He acts like he's still young. All right, now we've got number 9 and 10. Which choice best supports the conclusion Mr. Peters wants to attract attention? Well, if we think about at what point in this story does Mr. Peters want to attract attention, it's when he's flashing that ring, right? When he flashes the ring to the women, it's showing that he thinks that he has their attention and he wants to get it so that he can show that he is married, right? So that's where he's trying to show, he's trying to grab attention. Okay, that's when Mr. Peters wants to grab attention. So I'm going to highlight this in green here so you can see it clearly. We see that that's going to be lines 81 up to 85. Okay, so that's what we're going to go ahead and put as our answer there, and we see that that's going to end up being answer choice, looks like a B. Okay, so B will be our answer for number 9. Number 10, as used in line 93, becoming most nearly means what? Well, if we go up to question number 93, I'm going to go ahead and highlight becoming in blue so you can see it more clearly. Okay, we want to, oh, looks like we got the right color. It looks like it's just blending in, so let me just go ahead and erase that. All right, there we go. So he was always there tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not becoming in a man 45. Well, if we're going to replace this word, or not even if we're going to replace this word, but just what does this word mean in context, right? He's doing things that aren't typical in a man of 45, things that aren't common in a man of 45. Those are really, kind of words that we'd be looking for, anything along those lines. Fitting, right? That'd be perfect here. It's not typical, it's not common, it's not fitting of a man 45. We wouldn't say emerging, okay? We want to describe something where it's not typical, not common, not fitting. Okay, developing and happening, they don't work there either. Okay, our answer there's got to be answer choice B. Questions 11 through 21 are based on the following passages. Passage 1 is adopted from Catherine Beecher, Essay on Slavery and Abolitionism, originally published in 1837. Passage 2 is adopted from Angela E. Grimke, Letters to Catherine Beecher, originally published in 1838. Grimke encouraged Southern women to oppose slavery publicly. Passage 1 is Beecher's response to Grimke's views, and Passage 2 is Grimke's response to Beecher. So what I'm going to do here is the strategy I would use on the SAT reading test, and that's going to be to read passage 1 first, then answer the questions on passage 1, then read passage 2, and then answer the rest of the questions in the order they appear. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's read through passage 1. Heaven has appointed to one sex the superior, and to the other the subordinate station, and this without any reference to the character or conduct of either. It is therefore as much for the dignity as it is for the interest of females in all respects to conform to the duties of this relation. But while women hold a subordinate relation in society to the other sex, it is not because it was designed that her duties or influence should be any less important or all-pervading, but it was designed that the mode of gaining influence, of exercising power, should be altogether different and peculiar. A man may act on society by the collision of intellect in public debate. He may urge his measures by a sense of shame, by fear, and by personal interest. He may coerce by the combination of public sentiment. He may drive by physical force, and he does not outstep the boundaries of his sphere. But all the power and all the conquests that are lawful to women are those only which appeal to the kindly, generous, peaceful, and benevolent principles. Woman is to win everything by peace and love, by making herself so much respected, esteemed, and loved, that to yield to her opinions and to gratify her wishes will be the free will offering of the heart. But this is to be all accomplished in the domestic and social circle. There, let every woman become so cultivated and refined in intellect that her taste and judgment will be respected, so benevolent in feeling and action that her motives will be reverenced, so unassuming and unambitious that collision and competition will be banished, so gentle and easy to be entreated as that every heart will repose in her presence. Then the fathers, the husbands, and the sons will find an influence thrown around them to which they will yield not only willingly but proudly. A woman may seek the aid of cooperation and combination among her own sex to assist her in appropriate offices of piety, charity, maternal, and domestic duty. But whatever in any measure throws a woman into the attitude of a combatant, either for herself or others, whatever binds her in a party of conflict, whatever obliges her in any way to exert coercive influences, throws her out of her appropriate sphere. If these general principles are correct, they are entirely opposed to the plan of arraying females in any abolition movement. All right, now that we've read through passage 1, we'll go ahead and answer the questions on passage 1. So we have question number 11. In passage 1, Beecher makes which point about the status of women relative to that of man? Well, I can go ahead and show you the evidence for this. It looks like we do have evidence for the next one, but she clearly states that she believes that women are below men in rank, right? She thinks that men are essentially they have a higher rank than women. Women are subordinate, right? She uses the word subordinate a lot here. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this, right? We see her claim, heaven has appointed to one sex the superior, right? In this case, she's insinuating it's the male sex, and to the other, the subordinate station. And then we see this again right here. But while women hold a subordinate relation in society to the other sex, therefore saying men have a higher rank in society. It is not because it was designed her duties or influence should be any less important or all-pervading. So it's really clear to see here that ultimately her claim is that men are indeed superior to women. That's what she believes here. Okay, so we have option A, women depend on men for their safety and security, but men are largely independent of women. No, okay, that's not her main argument here. And then we have option, or that's not even her argument here. Like, she doesn't make this argument, like this is completely irrelevant. Answer choice A is completely wrong. And then B, women are inferior to men. Yes, she does make that argument, but women play a role as significant as that played by men. Yes, okay, we can see answer choice B is clearly supported by lines 6 through 10. Like, if we go back up here and I go and read this again, we have, but well, women hold a subordinate relation in society to the other sex, therefore women are inferior to men. It is not because it was designed that her duties or her influence should be any less important or all-pervading. Okay, so saying that women are inferior to men, but they play a role as significant as that played by men, we know that B is supported by the text, so it'll be our correct answer, and we know it's supported by lines 6 through 10. All right, number 13, in passage 1, Beecher implies women's effect on public life is largely what? Well, if you think about the context of that passage, right, she's really arguing that women aren't, she's not saying they're overlooked, right? She's just saying that they have a different effect on public life. And that effect, it comes from within the home, right? If I go back here and I go and show you this, okay, because anytime you answer a question on the SAT, you should have evidence, so I can go ahead and show you my evidence for this, okay? Obviously, I can remember this from context, but if you want to see this in the text, I'll show you that as well. She argues that women make their impact in the home. Okay, I'll go ahead and highlight this in yellow so you can see this really clearly, right? Right here, the social circle, right? But this will all be accomplished in the domestic and social circle. She says, she's talking about women's role right here. It's to win everything by peace and love, by making herself so respected, esteemed, and loved, that to yield her opinions and to gratify her wishes will be the free will offering of the heart, right? And she says that women will accomplish this in the domestic and social circle. So obviously she's arguing that men and women both have responsibilities, but that women's are more indirect and that they exert that influence within the home and family life. So that's why answer choice B will be correct there. She's not saying that women's effect on public life is unnecessary. In fact, she's arguing it is equally necessary as men, just in an indirect manner. Okay, she's not saying it's symbolic at all, so D is completely wrong as well. All right, and then 14, as used in line 2, station most nearly means what? Okay, so anytime I have a most nearly means question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the text, I'm going to find the word, and I'm going to come up with what I believe it means in context before looking at my answer choices. That way I'm not stuck between two. So we have heaven has appointed to one sex the superior and to the other the subordinate station. Okay, in this case, when we have subordinate in front of station, what that's ultimately telling us is that we need to be talking about some sort of rank. The reason that we know this is because if something is subordinate to another, it has to be below it. Okay, so I can't be using station in its typical fashion of referring to some sort of geographic location, for example, a train station, a station where transactions take place, or anything like that. So station can't be anything geographic. Okay, therefore it can't be a region. We wouldn't be referring to station as a studio here either. It can't be a district. Once again, it can't be something geographic. It has to be something that has some sort of rank or some sort of, class structure to it. So our answer there has to be D, rank. All right, moving on to 15. As used in line 12, peculiar most nearly means what? Well, let's go ahead and use that same strategy. We're going to go to line 12. And we're going to take a look at the word peculiar. So I will highlight this in green so you can clearly see it. Okay. We have, but it was designed that the mode of gaining influence and of exercising power should be altogether different and peculiar. Okay, keep in mind, altogether different. What could we also say with peculiar then? We could say it means unique. So we can go ahead and look for an answer choice that means something along the lines of unique, or potentially the word unique itself. If we do that, we have eccentric, which does not mean anything close to unique. Surprising, also nothing close to unique. Distinctive, absolutely, right? If something is distinctive, it's also unique. So our answer there would be C, not infrequent. Okay, that's way off. All right, now that we're done answering the questions on passage 1 and we see you have a question referring us to passage 2, we're going to go ahead and go back up and read passage 2. All right, so passage 2. The investigation of the rights of the slave has led me to a better understanding of my own. I have found the anti-slavery cause to be the high school of morals in our land, the school in which human rights are more fully investigated and better understood and taught than any other. Here a great fundamental principle is uplifted and illuminated, and from the central light rays innumerable stream all around. Human beings have rights, because they are moral beings. The rights of all men grow out of their moral nature, and as all men have the same moral nature, they have essentially the same rights. These rights cannot be wrested from the slave, but they cannot be. These rights may be wrested from the slave, but they cannot be alienated. His title to himself is as perfect now as is that of Lyman Beecher. It is stamped on his moral being and is like that imperishable. Now, if rights are founded in the nature of our moral being, then the mere circumstance of sex does not give to man higher rights and responsibilities than to woman, and to suppose that it does would be to deny the self-evident truth that the physical constitution is the mere instrument of the moral nature. To suppose that it does would be to break up utterly the relations of the two natures and to reverse their functions, exalting the animal nature into a monarch and humbling the moral into a slave, making the former a proprietor and the latter its property. When human beings are regarded as moral beings, sex, instead of being enthroned upon the summit, administering upon rights and responsibilities, sinks into insignificance and nothingness. My doctrine, then, is that whatever it is morally right for a man to do, it is morally right for woman to do. Our duties originate not from the difference of sex, but from the diversity of our relations in life, the various gifts and talents committed to our care, and the different eras in which we live. All right, now we can answer questions 16 through, I believe, 21. All right, so we have, what is Grimke's central claim in passage 2? Well, we think about her claim, it's really the opposite of claim in passage 1, right? In passage 2, Grimke's arguing that, and we actually see this directly in answer choice A when I glance at this, we have the rights of individuals are not determined by race or gender. Okay, she opens up, and I'll go ahead and show you this as well here. Let's see if this is an evidence question. It doesn't look like it is, but I'll show you this anyway, right? She opens up by talking about the anti-slavery clause, and ultimately she then relates that into how someone's race has nothing to do with their human rights. Okay, even if legally we deny people human rights based on their race, it doesn't change the fact that they still have those human rights. And she then takes that and then applies it to the argument of sex as well. Okay, so we have to find an argument that shows both of that, right? Sex, gender, okay, and then race as well, right? The rights of individuals are not determined by race or gender. So our answer there's got to be A. She doesn't make the argument that men and women must learn to work together. Okay, that's not even a part of her passage. And then C, moral rights are the most important distinction between human beings and animals. Once again, that's far too narrow on that one sentence, basically, that touched on with the word animals. Far too narrow, completely off base there. And then D, men and women should have equal opportunities to flourish. Once again, saying equal opportunities to flourish there, that's not part of her argument. Okay, her argument's really all about rights. Her central claim is all about the rights of individuals and how they're not determined by race or gender. All right, next up, in passage 2, Grimke makes which point about human rights? Well, if we think about her arguments about human rights, okay, she relates it, and this is kind of shown in answer choice A for 16. She argues that the rights of individuals are not determined by race or gender. So if we're going to have an answer choice of 17 that's not the same, we kind of just got to read through these. We have option A, they're viewed differently in various cultures around the world. She never talks about that. And then option B, they retain their moral authority regardless of whether they are recognized by law. Yes. Where does she talk about this? And I see my next question's evidence, so I'll go and show you that as well. We see that she talks about this, and I'm going to look for, I believe that there's a point where she said, there it is, imperishable, okay? Right? These rights are imperishable. So I'll go to the beginning. We have these rights may be wrested from the slave, but they cannot be alienated. His title to himself is as perfect now as it is of that of Lyman Beecher. It is stamped on his moral being is like that imperishable. So whether or not the law acknowledges it, she argues that these rights are imperishable. They will always belong to the human being, no matter what the law says. So we see that our support for that then would be lines 61 to 65. So our answer then for number 18 would be answer choice B. All right, moving on then, we have question 19. Which choice best states the relationship between the two passages? This is a common question you'll get when you have two passages like this. In this case, it's very clear to see passage 2 is taking the direct opposite stance of passage 1 and really taking issue with what is said in passage 1, which is obviously going to be answer choice B, right? If we take a look at A, C, and D, I'll show you why those are wrong as well. We have option A, passage 2 illustrates the practical difficulties of a proposal made in passage 1. There really is no proposal made in passage 1, so that's why answer choice A is incorrect. And then option C, passage 2 provides a historical context for the perspective. Once again, we're not providing a historical context here, so that's why C is wrong. And one thing I will touch on with answer choice A as well, some of you guys may think, oh, well, the author of passage 1, she made, her claims and her argument. That's different from a proposal, right? Making a claim and making your argument is different from just proposing an idea. Okay, so answer choice A is incorrect on that basis. Also, passage 2 really isn't illustrating practical difficulties. It's just taking really like the opposite stance and then going after passage 1, right? Taking issue with that primary argument in passage 1. So B is a significantly better answer choice than A, and A is incorrect because of what I just outlined there. And then answer choice D, passage 2 elaborates upon several ideas implied in passage 1. We're not elaborating on ideas. We're going straight after that primary argument from passage 1. Okay, these two authors really have, pretty much as polar opposite ideas as you can, and they're kind of going at it, at least, like in a literary sense. All right, and then next up we got question number 20. Based on the passages, both authors would agree with which of the following claims. In a question like this, you just have to go through your answers, see which one's correct. So we have option A, women have moral duties and responsibilities. Yes, how do we know that that's correct? Well, the author of passage 1, she argues women have moral duties and responsibilities that are different than men, but that they still have them. And then the author of passage 2 argues women have moral duties and responsibilities that are the same as men. Okay, so they're both arguing that they have moral duties and responsibilities. They just differ on which moral duties and responsibilities, each sex is assigned. And then we have option B, men often work selflessly for political change. No. C, the ethical obligations of women are often undervalued. No. And then D, political activism is important for women as it is for men. No. Okay, answer there's got to be A. All right, moving on to question number 21. Beecher would most likely have reacted to lines 65 to 68. Now to women of passage 2 with what? Well, let's go ahead and go to 65 to 68. We'll take a look. All right, so we have now if rights are founded. Let me go ahead and switch to my highlighter so you can see this. So I'm going to highlight this in blue so you can see it easier. We have now if rights are founded in the nature of our moral being, then the mere circumstance of sex does not give to men higher rights and responsibilities than to women. So obviously the author of passage 1 is taking the exact opposite argument, right? The author of passage 1 is arguing that men and women, they are fundamentally different, and therefore, because of that, women have lower responsibilities and rights, okay? So that's the argument of the author from passage 1. So really the direct opposite there. So she's obviously going to disagree then with what is being said in those lines. So we have option A, sympathy. She's not going to react with sympathy, right? She's going to be completely against it. And then we have option B, agreement. Obviously not. And then we have option C, dismay. Potentially, we'll go ahead and read on, because she feels that women actually have a more difficult role to play in society than men do. That's not true. Okay, author of passage 1 would not say this part, right? This second half here. So that's how we know C is incorrect. So obviously our answer will be D, and I'll explain why as well. Disagreement, because she feels that the natures of men and women are fundamentally different. Therefore, the author of passage 1 feels that men and women have fundamentally different roles and responsibilities, whereas the author of passage 2 believes the opposite. Questions 22 to 31 are based on the following passage and supplementary material. This passage is adopted from Brian Walsh, Whole Food Blues, Why Organic Agriculture May Not Be So Sustainable. When it comes to energy, everyone loves efficiency. Cutting energy waste is one of those goals that both sides of the political divide can agree on, even if they sometimes diverge on how to best get there. Energy efficiency allows us to get more out of our given resources, which is good for the economy and mostly good for the environment as well. In an increasingly hot and crowded world, the only sustainable way to live is to get more out of less. Every environmentalist would agree. But change the conversation to food, and suddenly efficiency doesn't look so good. Conventional industrial agriculture has become incredibly efficient on a simple land-to-food basis. Thanks to fertilizers, mechanization, and irrigation, each American farmer feeds over 155 people worldwide. Conventional farming gets more and more crop per square foot of cultivated land. Over 170 bushels of corn per acre in Iowa, for example, which can mean less territory needs to be converted from wilderness to farmland. And since a third of the planet is already used for agriculture, destroying forests and other wild habitats along the way, anything that could help us produce more food on less land would seem to be good for the environment. Of course, that's not how environmentalists regard their arugula, a leafy green. They have embraced organic food as better for the environment and healthier and tastier too than the stuff produced by agricultural corporations. Environmentalists disdain the enormous amounts of food, amounts of energy needed and waste created by conventional farming, while organic practices, foregoing artificial fertilizers and chemical pesticides, are considered far more sustainable. Sales of organic food rose 7.7% in 2010, up to $26.7 billion, and people are making those purchases for their consciences as much as their taste buds. Yet a new meta-analysis in Nature does the math and comes to a hard conclusion. Organic farming yields 25% fewer crops on average than conventional agriculture. More land is therefore needed to produce fewer crops, and that means organic farming may not be as good for the planet as we think. In the Nature analysis, scientists from McGill University in Montreal and the University of Minnesota performed an analysis of 66 studies comparing conventional and organic methods across 34 different crop species, from fruits to grains to legumes. They found that organic farming delivered a lower yield for every crop type, though the disparity varied widely. For rainwater legume crops like beans or perennial crops like fruit trees, organic trailed conventional agriculture by just 5%. Yet for major cereal crops like corn or wheat, as well as most vegetables, all of which provide the bulk of the world's calories, conventional agriculture outperformed organics by more than 25%. The main difference is nitrogen, the chemical key to plant growth. Conventional agriculture makes use of 171 million metric tons of synthetic fertilizer each year, and all that nitrogen enables much faster plant growth than the slower release of nitrogen from the compost or cover crops used in organic farming. When we talk about a green revolution, we really mean a nitrogen revolution, along with a lot of water. But not all nitrogen used in conventional fertilizer ends up in crops. Much of it ends up running off the soil and into the oceans, creating vast polluted dead zones. We're already putting more nitrogen into the soil than the planet can stand over the long term. And conventional agriculture also depends heavily on chemical pesticides, which can have unintended side effects. What this means is that while conventional agriculture is more efficient, sometimes much more efficient than organic farming, there are trade-offs with each. So an ideal global agricultural system, in the views of the study's authors, may borrow the best from both systems. As Jonathan Foley of the University of Minnesota explained, the bottom line, today's organic farming practices are probably best deployed in fruit and vegetable farms where growing nutrition, not just bulk calories, is the primary goal. But for delivering sheer calories, especially in the staple crops of wheat, rice, maize, soybeans, and so on, conventional farms have the advantage right now. Looking forward, I think we will need to deploy different kinds of practices, especially new mixed approaches that take the best of organic and conventional farming systems where they are best suited, geographically, economically, socially, etc. All right, now we can go and move on to the passage questions. As you can see, we have two figures, so we'll end up having a question about those at the end. As used in line 14, simple most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 14, figure out what simple most nearly means. The reason we go back to the passage first is so we don't get stuck between two answer choices. So I'm going to highlight simple here in blue. Hopefully you can see that pretty clearly. Start from the beginning of the sentence. Conventional industrial agriculture has become incredibly efficient on a simple land-to-food basis. In this case, we really could remove simple, right? Because simple is just saying that it is a land-to-food basis. So we just got to make sure that with our answer choice, we're showing that it's a simple land-to-food basis. We can't have any word there that would adjust the meaning of land-to-food basis. So we could be looking for something like basic or really anything like that. I got to make sure that it doesn't change the meaning of land-to-food basis. So you have option A, straightforward. That's perfect, okay? That's not changing land-to-food basis. If we say a straightforward land-to-food basis, it means the same thing. However, if we were to pick any choice of answer choices answer choices B through D, we see all of those would be sort of changing the meaning of land-to-food basis, which we can't do. We set a simple land-to-food basis, and in the context of this, that just meant a straightforward land-to-food basis. So our answer's got to be A. All right, moving on. According to the passage, a significant attribute of conventional agriculture is its ability to what? Well, you should be able to hopefully answer this just by, reading through that passage, because we know that the big advantage or the big significant attribute of conventional agriculture is that it can feed a lot more people on a per unit basis, on a per unit of land basis, right? So if we find an answer choice that matches that, we go and take a look at A through D. We have option A, produce a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. No, organic and conventional both can produce a wide variety, so that's not it. B, maximize the output of cultivated land. Yes, the big focus with conventional agriculture is it can produce mass amounts of food on a per unit of land basis. And then we have the option C, satisfy the dietary needs of the world's population. If you want to get technical, organic and conventional, they both probably could do this, but one would take significantly more land, that being organic. So that's why C is incorrect here. And then D, lessen the necessity of nitrogen in plant growth. No, okay, conventional still needs that nitrogen for plant growth. In fact, it actually needs more nitrogen, really. And then we got question number 24. Which choice best reflects the perspective of environmentalists in line 27 on conventional agriculture? Well, we're directed to a line, so let's go ahead and go there. I will highlight that in yellow so you can clearly see where I'm referring to. So I'll go ahead and do this. Okay, we highlight this in yellow. We have, of course, that's not how most environmentalists regard their arugula, a leafy green. They have embraced, and keep in mind I'm reading one sentence ahead to get a little bit more context here, since it's a short sentence. They have embraced organic food as better for the planet and healthier and tastier too than the stuff produced by agricultural corporations. All right, so as we can see here, the environmentalists, they really believe organic is better, they believe it's healthier, and they believe it's better for the environment. Okay? It says better for the planet here, so obviously they think it's better for the environment. So ultimately, environmentalists think organic's just much better really across all aspects that are being considered in this passage. So we have option A, it produces inferior fruits and vegetables. Keep in mind, we're referring to conventional agriculture. Environmentalists do believe conventional agriculture produces inferior fruits and vegetables. They believe that they're less healthy. They believe that it is also detrimental to the environment. Like I said, it showed in the passage that environmentalists believe it's worse for the planet. So answer choice A is going to be our correct answer choice. And we got to provide our evidence. Well, we know our evidence because we kind of just highlighted it, but we'll go ahead and get the line number just to kind of show you. We see it's going to be right here, okay, where we say they have embraced organic food as better for the planet, showing it's better for the environment, and healthier and tastier. So they believe that it's better overall than, or they believe organic is better overall than conventional agriculture. Okay, so as we can see, then our answer there's got to be answer choice B for number 25. All right, moving on to number 26 now. Which statement best expresses a relationship between organic farming and conventional farming that is presented in the passage? Well, ultimately, if we think about the relationship, right, we're really making the argument that they're just different, okay? We're not necessarily saying one is better than the other in the context of the whole passage, so we'll go ahead and look at our answer choice to see which one makes sense here. We have option A, both are equally sustainable. We don't make that argument. We make the argument that organic is actually more sustainable. Okay, so answer choice A would be incorrect. And then it also says, but they differ dramatically in the amount of land they require to produce equivalent yields. Well, yes, that last part is true. Saying they're both equally sustainable is not true. Okay, the argument is made organic is more sustainable. And then option B, both rely on artificial chemicals for pest control, but organic farmers use the chemicals sparingly in conjunction with natural remedies. Okay, they don't both rely on artificial chemicals. Okay, organic would not use artificial chemicals for pest control. Okay, and then option C, both use nitrogen to encourage plant growth. Yes, that's true, but the nitrogen used in conventional farming comes from synthetic sources. Yes, that's perfect. Okay, it's completely accurate according to the passage. It's contained in the passage. That's perfect. All right, and then if we look at our evidence then, we got to find where we talk about nitrogen. So if we can go there, it's going to be towards the end, but not completely at the end. We see it's right here, right? The main key difference here is nitrogen, the chemical key for plant growth. Conventional agriculture makes use of 171 million metric tons of synthetic fertilizer each year, and all that nitrogen enables much faster plant growth than the slower release of nitrogen from the compost or cover crops used in organic farming. So as you can see, that's going to be our evidence there, because what lines 61 through 65 is ultimately supporting is what we just said, right? It's supporting that they both need nitrogen, but then the nitrogen used in conventional farming comes from synthetic sources. Okay, so clearly that's going to be our evidence there. And like I said, that was lines 61 to 65, so our answer there will be D. All right, number 28, according to Foley, an ideal global agriculture system in line 80 will do what? Well, that's really referring to this excerpt right here, okay, where he's describing what the ideal global agricultural system will be. Now, keep in mind, when we're describing the ideal global agricultural system, we're not describing what it is today, which is what this paragraph I got an arrow to is. We're describing right here, right? Looking forward, what would be the best agricultural program for the world. So looking forward, it says, I think we will need to deploy different kinds of practices, especially new mixed approaches that take the best of organic and conventional farming systems where they are best suited geographically, economically, and socially. So he's calling for a mixed approach here. So we got to find an answer choice that shows that. So if we take a look at question number 28, we have option A, focuses primarily on yield percentages in global markets. No, we have to show something that is considering multiple factors. Okay, as we can see, he listed out 4 factors there, right? So considers multiple factors in the selection of farming techniques. You can want to consider the social factors, economic factors, environmental factors, all of that. Okay, so answer choice B there is going to be our correct answer. If we take a look at C, weighs the economic interests of farmers against the needs of consumers. No, because that's only weighing one interest. We want to weigh multiple in the consideration, environmental and social as well. And then D, puts the nutritional value of produce first and foremost. No, that's not what we're doing. Like we said, we want to take that mixed approach, weighing a multitude of factors. All right, and then 29, in line 88, sheer most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 88 here. We're going to go there. I'll go ahead and highlight this in blue so you can see it very clearly. Okay, so the word I believe was sheer. Okay, so right here. But for delivering sheer calories, especially in our staple crops of wheat, rice, maize, soybeans, and so on, conventional farms have the advantage right now. So sheer there really just means, simple calories, basic calories, anything that's just showing, we're just referring to calories here. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking for here. Potential, another one could be pure, potentially. Looky here, we got most nearly means transparent. We wouldn't describe calories as transparent. We wouldn't describe calories as abrupt. We wouldn't describe calories as steep. None of those make sense to describe calories. But what does make sense is pure. Really, we could kind of almost just take it out, but we do kind of need to have a word there, I guess, just to show that we are referring to just calories. We're not concerned about nutritional value. What's the answer choice that shows we don't care about nutritional value? We only care about the amount of calories and that it's just a simple calorie. Correct answer there would be D, pure. All right, moving on to number 30. Which statement is best supported by the information provided in figure 1? In this case, if we take a look at figure 1, we're not going to be able to just look at it, come up with a trend, and then answer based on that because there really is no trend, right? We see that it just kind of goes like this, but if we look at our legend, we see that that doesn't really tell us much because everything is just, a different type of crop. So in this case, we just have to go A through D till we find a correct answer. So we have option A, the organic yield as a percentage of conventional yield is greater for vegetables than for fruits. Let's check that out. In this case, we would need vegetables be closer to the right than fruits are. So as we can see, we see vegetables are going to be this blank circle, and we see that that's the farthest to the left, therefore that can't be true. Okay, so answer choice A will be wrong for 31. Looking at B, the organic yield as a percentage of conventional crops, the organic yield as a percentage of conventional yield is similar for cereals and all crops. All we got to do there is see if they're pretty much a vertical line down. Okay, so we have cereals as this box here. If we go up, we see that we have all crops, therefore answer choice B is correct. Hopefully you can see that, right? They're pretty much that same percentage. Therefore, our answer there will be B for number 30. Okay, and then obviously we don't have to check C and D because we know that B is factually correct. It's going to be the right answer there. 31, which of the following claims is supported by figure 2? Well, if we go to figure 2, once again, I'll just show you if there was a trend in the figure that we could identify and then go into our answer choice and kind of find the answer choice that, was clearly right because of the trend, that'd be useful. In this case, once again, we can't do that because our legend is so variant and there's really no trend there. Okay, because this legend is the way it is, just describing these different types of plants, it's really the only way that we can figure out our answers just to go A through D again. So we have option A. Of the organically grown species represented, soybeans have the lowest yield. We'll see if that's true. In that case, soybeans would have to be the furthest to the left. We see soybeans are not the furthest to the left. They're pretty much the furthest to the right. So we know A is incorrect. Now we'll take a look at B. The organically grown maize and barley represented are comparable in their yields to conventionally grown maize and barley. If that were true, maize and barley, they would have to be here on the graph, right, where I'm putting these blue dots. But we see that they're not. And because they're not, we know that our answer choice B is incorrect as well. Okay, if it was organically grown, was comparable to the yields in conventionally grown, it'd have to be 100%, which would be far to the right, which is not the case. And then C, of the organically grown species represented, tomatoes have the highest yield. This one, again, really easy to check. We just see if tomatoes, the farthest one to the right on figure 2. We see it's not. We see that that would be soybeans. Okay, so we see that our answer C will be incorrect, and our answer is going to have to be D. I'll show you why D is correct as well here. The organically grown species represented have lower yields than their conventionally grown counterparts do. All that means is that all the percentages are below 100, right? If we look at the title of this, we have organic yield as percentage of conventional yield. Since they're all below this 100% mark, that means all organic yields of all of these species of plants are below that of conventional yields. Therefore, answer choice D for 31 has to be correct. So we have this passage is adopted from John Bohannon, Why You Shouldn't Trust Internet Comments, copyright 2013 by American Association for the Advancement of Science. The wisdom of crowds has become a mantra of the internet age. Need to choose a new vacuum cleaner? Check out the reviews on online merchant Amazon. But a new study suggests that online scores don't always reveal the best choice. A massive controlled experiment of web users finds that such ratings are highly susceptible to irrational herd behavior, and that the herd can be manipulated. Sometimes the crowd really is wiser than you. The classic examples are guessing the weight of a bull or the number of gumballs in a jar. Your guess is probably going to be far from the mark, whereas the average of many people's choices is remarkably close to the true number. But what happens when the goal is to judge something less tangible, such as the quality or worth of a product? According to one theory, the wisdom of the crowd still holds. Measuring the aggregate of people's opinions produces a stable, reliable value. Skeptics, however, argue that people's opinions are easily swayed by those of others. So by nudging a crowd early on, by presenting contrary opinions, for example, exposing them to some very good or very bad attitudes, will steer the crowd in a different direction. To test which hypothesis is true, you would need to manipulate huge numbers of people, exposing them to false information and determining how it affects their opinions. A team led by Sinan Aral, a network scientist at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, did exactly that. Aral has been secretly working with a popular news website that aggregates news stories. The website allows users to make comments about news stories and vote each other's comments up and down. The vote tallies are visible as a number next to each comment, and the position of the comment is chronological. Stories on the site get an average of about 10 comments and about 3 votes per comment. It's a follow-up to his experiment using people's ratings of movies to measure how much individual people influence each other online. Answer: a lot. This time he wanted to know how much the crowd influences the individual and whether it can be controlled from the outside. For 5 months, every comment submitted by a user randomly received an upvote, positive, a downvote, negative, or, as a control, no vote at all. The team then observed how users rated those comments. The users generated more than 100,000 comments that were viewed more than 10 million times and rated more than 300,000 times by other users. At least when it comes to comments on news sites, the crowd is more herd-like than wise. Comments that received fake positive votes from the researchers were 32% more likely to receive more positive votes compared with the control, the team reports. And those comments were no more likely than the control to be downvoted by the next viewer to see them. By the end of the study, positively manipulated comments got an overall boost of about 25%. However, the same did not hold true for negative manipulation. The ratings of comments that got a fake downvote were usually negated by an upvote by the next user to see them. Our experiment does not reveal the psychology behind people's decisions, Aral says, but an intuitive explanation is that people are more skeptical of negative social influence. They're more willing to go along with positive opinions from other people. Duncan Watts, a network scientist at Microsoft Research in New York City, agrees with that conclusion. But one question is whether the positive herding bias is specific to this site or true in general, Watts says. He points out that the category of the news items in the experiment had a strong effect on how much people could be manipulated. I would have thought that business is pretty similar to economics, yet they find a much stronger effect, almost 50% stronger, for the former than the latter. What explains this difference? If we're going to apply these findings in the real world, we'll need to know the answers. Will companies be able to boost their products by manipulating online ratings on a massive scale? That is easier said than done, Watts says. If people detect or learn that comments on a website are being manipulated, the herd may spook and leave entirely. All right, so now that we've gone ahead and read the passage, I'm going to go ahead and go through the questions. So you have question 32. Over the course of the passage, the main focus shifts from a discussion of an experiment and its results to what? Well, in answering this, what we can think about is where do we stop discussing the experiment and its results and shift to something else? If I was to go up into this passage, I can go ahead and show you where that's going to occur, right? We see that we're still talking about the results here, right? Saying that they're 32% more likely, still discussing results, pretty much all the way down to right here, okay? We're still discussing results, and then at this point, when we start to get into this quotation from Duncan Watts, that's where we make that shift, okay? So right here, and I'll go ahead and highlight this in blue, this is where we're making this transition. So from here on, from this highlighted blue portion on, we see that instead of discussing, the experiment and its results, now we start asking questions, right? We have one question is whether the positive herding bias is specific to the site. We ask another question at the end, right? What explains the difference? You know, if we're going to apply these findings in the real world, we'll need to know the answers. We also point out the category of news items had a strong effect. So here we start questioning, and then once again in line 85, will companies be able to boost their products by manipulating online ratings on a massive scale? So as you can see, we have multiple questions here. So that's really what ends up happening, you know, in this shift, right? We shift from discussing the experiment and its results, now going into questioning things, right? Whether the herding bias is specific to the site, and then also will companies be able to use this to boost products on a massive scale? All right, so if we go down and take a look at our answer choices, we have option A, an explanation of the practical applications of the results. Well, in this case, we're not explaining the practical applications, so that's going to be incorrect because of that. Option B, a consideration of the questions prompted by the results. Yes, we're considering those questions. For example, is this site specific? And also, will this allow companies to boost their product sales on a massive scale by manipulating, you know, the reviews and upvoting and downvoting different reviews? So that is ultimately what we're considering when we make this transition from talking about the experiment and its results. So B will be our correct answer there. All right, and then looking at 33, the author of the passage suggests that crowds may be more effective at what? In this case, we kind of have to just read through our answers. There's no way to come up with our own answer, you know, before looking at these because we don't know what it's comparing. Okay, so crowds may be more effective at option A, creating controversy, than examining an issue in depth. No. Option B, reinforcing members' ideas, then challenging those ideas. No, because we don't really touch on anyone challenging any ideas. Okay, so that's why answer choice B is incorrect. Option C, arrive at accurate quantitative answers, then producing a valid qualitative judgment. Yes, why is that going to be our answer? Well, we can see if we have evidence as our next question. In this case, we see that we do. So I can go ahead and show you that evidence for this, you know, because we're going to need it for the next question anyways. But if you're ever answering an SAT reading question, you should have evidence for your answer just on the basis of you answering it, because you should always have evidence for your answer. So if I go up here, where we're talking about quantitative judgments comes in here by these gumballs, right? Sometimes the crowd really is wiser than you. The classic examples are guessing the weight of a bull or the number of gumballs in a jar. Both of those are quantitative measurements. And then we say your guess is probably going to be far from the mark, whereas the average of many people's choices is remarkably close to the true number. Once again, that's a quantitative measure. So as we can see there, we're discussing in lines, it looks like 9 through 14, or potentially 11 to 14 if we cut out that first sentence. We see that we're ultimately discussing how herds or groups tend to arrive at more accurate quantitative judgments than qualitative. Okay, so they are very efficient in coming up with those quantitative judgments. So the herd is smart when it is dealing with quantitative answers, but not so much in qualitative. And answer choice B for 34 is what ultimately provides that support. All right, and then looking at number 35 now, which choice best supports the view of the skeptics in line 20? Well, we're going to go to line 20, see what the skeptics are arguing. So I'll go ahead and highlight this in yellow so you can distinguish it from the rest. We have skeptics, however, argue that people's opinions are easily swayed by those of others. So this will be getting into the qualitative aspect of the research, right? So ultimately that research is coming in the lines over here, okay, right around this arrow, right, where that is contained. Now, keep in mind, if we take a look at the line numbers that it gave us, it's pretty much in that section as well. We see it's like 55 to 79. So that's where we're going to be looking for. Now, if we take a look at this, we have we're going to look for where ultimately it's giving us that data, that evidence, because that's what we need here is we need evidence to show that people's qualitative opinions can be swayed. And I see that right here. Comments that received fake positive votes from the researchers were 32% more likely to receive more positive votes compared with a control, the team reports. So that's showing us that by indicating a fake positive qualitative judgment, you're going to end up increasing the amount of real qualitative judgments by people that are positive. So in essence, qualitative judgments then are able to be controlled in a herd and are less accurate in a herd. Okay, so that would be our evidence there. So it looks like that's going to be lines 55 to about 58. So going down here into our answer choices, we see that that's going to be answer choice A for 35. All right, moving on to 36 now. Which action would best address the question Watts raises about the study? Well, if we remember, he had two questions, right? His question one, and I'll go ahead and go up to that in a minute. His first question is whether the positive herding bias is specific to the site, right? And I'm going to go ahead and highlight this in yellow so you can see this. Okay, or I'll highlight it in green since I haven't used that yet. Right here, one question is whether the positive herding bias is specific to the site. So that's the first question. Second question would be, will companies be able to boost their products by manipulating online ratings on a massive scale? So we ultimately, I believe, are looking for an answer to one of those two questions in our question 36. So which action would best address a question? We have option A, providing fewer fake positive comments. No. We need to know if it's site specific or if companies will be able to use fake reviews in order to boost sales. Option B, using multiple websites to collect ratings. Yes. Why? Well, because that's addressing the question that we raised of if this is site specific. Okay. If we use multiple websites, then that can answer that question for us. So that's why B is our correct answer there for 36. All right, 37. A user in line 85 boost most nearly means what? Well, in this case, we're going to go up to line 85. We're going to go and find boost in here, and I'll go ahead and highlight this in yellow so you can see it more clearly. Okay, so it's in line 85, words boost right here. So will companies be able to boost their products by manipulating online ratings on a massive scale? Well, in this case, when we say boost, really we just mean increase sales, right? That's the ultimate question here. Are companies going to be able to increase their sales of their products by manipulating online ratings? So potential things here could be market, promote, increase sales, but generally it's only going to be a one-word answer. So we'd be looking for something like market or promote here. So we see we don't have market, we see we do have promote, and I'll go ahead and show you why the other answer choices are incorrect as well here. We wouldn't say that they're going to accelerate product, increase product, or protect product. Now, you did hear me say increase sales of their products, but if we just say increase, we're not sure what we're referring to. We would have to add the word sales in order for A to potentially be a correct answer. So as you can see, in this case, our answer's got to be C. All right, moving on to 38 now. As used in line 86, scale most nearly means what? Well, once again, similar strategy to what we just had. We're going to go to 86. We see that we have scale right here, so I'll go ahead and mark that. I'm going to go ahead and put that in yellow as well here, so I'll erase that. There we go. All right, will companies be able to boost their products by manipulating online ratings on a massive scale? Well, in this case, scale really just means a massive level, potentially really just a massive level or a massive scale, something indicating that it's on a broad basis, right? That it's happening, across a wide variety of bases, really. So really a massive scale, massive level. That's kind of the only options. There's not a ton of other words that could work there. So if we go down here, we see we do have level. We wouldn't say that they're looking to do this on a massive wage because that wouldn't make sense, or interval. That'd be more dealing in time, and this isn't dealing with time. This is dealing with scale, and scale in this case referring to a level of sales. And then scheme, once again, that wouldn't make sense here either. All right, and then 39, in the figure, which category of news has an artificially upvoted mean score of 2.5? In this case, we go to this figure and we find where that mean score, right, which is going to be this black mark here because that's the artificially upvoted, where that is at a 2.5. Okay, so we see we have mean score on this axis, a 2.5 will be here. If we draw this line across and then we go down once we find that black dot at 2.5, we see that that's going to be politics. So politics will be our answer there. So if we go down here, we got politics, and that'll be answer choice B. All right, number 40. According to the figure, which category of news showed the smallest difference in mean score between artificially upvoted comments and control comments? So if we go up here, we see that the difference is going to be the difference between the control, which is that white dot, and the artificially upvoted, which is the black dot. So which has the smallest difference between those two dots? And we see that that's going to be right here, which is going to be general news. Okay, that's where the smallest difference is between those two dots. So ultimately, if we go down here, we see general news. That'll be answer choice D. All right, number 41, data presented in the figure most directly support which idea from the passage? Well, in this case, we can just quick take a glance at the figure, see if there's any general trend we can see. We see pretty much all categories are above at, right around 2 at least or higher. So that's pretty much the general trend that we see there. We also see that there's, a fair amount of variance between the categories as well. All right, now let's go ahead and answer 41 if we can answer it based on the trends. Otherwise, we'll have to go back and forth as we go through these answer choices. So we have data presented in the figure most directly supports which idea? Option A, the mean score of artificially downvoted comments is similar to that of the control. Well, we know it's not similar to that of control because ultimately, if I go back up here, you'll be able to see this pretty clearly. We have a large difference between these black and white dots, which means that they're not very close to each other, not very similar, and that's why A is incorrect there. So if we go back down, we can get rid of A. Looking at B, the patterns observed in the experiment suggest people are suspicious of negative social influence. In this case, our figure is ultimately showing the impact of fake positive upvotes. Okay, so saying that anything really about negative social influence here isn't applicable because our figure doesn't talk about that or show anything about that. C, the positive bias observed in users of the news site may not apply to human behavior in other contexts. Well, that's not directly supported by the figure. Okay, there's no data presented in the figure that can, really state anything about answer choice C. Answer choice C would be something that would be stated in the passage, but it's not represented in the figure here. So by default, our answer would have to be D, but I'll show you why that's correct as well here. We have the type of story being commented on has an impact on the degree to which people can be influenced. We see that that's true because if we go back up to our figure, all of these different categories, they have different mean artificially upvoted values, right? We see if we're to draw a line connecting all these black dots, ultimately there's going to be deviation, right? We see we're going up, down, and then all the way back up. So as you can see that moves around there. So that's why D will be our answer there for 41. All right, so questions 42 to 52 are based on the following passage. The passage is adopted from Joshua 4, Moonwalking with Einstein, The Art and Science of Remembering Everything. Copyright 2011 by Joshua 4. In 2000, a neuroscientist at University College London named Eleanor Maguire wanted to find out to what effect, if any, all that driving around the labyrinth streets of London might have on cabbies' brains. When she brought 16 taxi drivers into her lab and examined their brains in an MRI scanner, she found one surprising and important difference. The right posterior hippocampus, a part of the brain known to be involved in spatial navigation, was 7% larger than normal in the cabbies. A small but very significant difference. Maguire concluded that all of that wayfinding around London had physically altered the gross structure of their brains. The more years a cabbie had been on the road, the more pronounced the effect. The brain is a mutable organ, capable within limits of reorganizing itself and readapting to new kinds of sensory input, a phenomenon known as neuroplasticity. It had long been thought that the adult brain was incapable of spawning new neurons, that while learning caused synapses to rearrange themselves and new links between brain cells to form, the brain's basic anatomical structure was more or less static. Maguire's study suggested the old inherent wisdom was simply not true. After her groundbreaking study of London cabbies, Maguire decided to turn her attention to mental athletes. She teamed up with Elizabeth Valentine and John Wilding, authors of the academic monograph Superior Memory, to study 10 individuals who had finished near the top of the World Memory Championship. They wanted to find out if the memorizers' brains were like the London cabbies, structurally different from the rest of ours, or if they somehow were just making better use of the memory abilities that we all possess. The researchers put both the mental athletes and a group of matched control subjects into MRI scanners and asked them to memorize 3-digit numbers, black and white photographs of people's faces, and magnified images of snowflakes, while their brains were being scanned. Maguire and her team thought it was possible that they might discover anatomical differences in the brains of the memory champs. Evidence that their brains had somehow reorganized themselves in the process of doing all that intense remembering. But when the researchers reviewed the imaging data, not a single significant structural difference turned up. The brains of the mental athletes appeared to be indistinguishable from those of the control subjects. What's more, on every single test of general cognitive ability, the mental athlete scores came back well within the normal range. The memory champs weren't smarter, and they didn't have special brains. But there was one telling difference between the brains of the mental athletes and the control subjects. When the researchers looked at which parts of the brain were lighting up on the mental athletes, or when the mental athletes were memorizing, they found that they were activating entirely different circuitry. According to the functional MRIs, regions of the brain that were less active in the control subjects seemed to be working in overdrive for the mental athletes. Surprisingly, when the mental athletes were learning new information, they were engaging several regions of the brain known to be involved in 2 specific tasks: visual memory and spatial navigation, including the same right posterior hippocampal region that the London cabbies had enlarged with all their daily wayfinding. At first glance, this wouldn't seem to make any sense. Why would mental athletes be conjuring images in their mind's eye when they were trying to learn 3-digit numbers? Why would they be navigating like London cabbies when they're supposed to be remembering the shapes of snowflakes? Maguire and her team asked the mental athletes to describe exactly what was going through their minds as they memorized. The mental athletes said they were consciously converting the images they were being asked to memorize into images. They were consciously converting the information they were being asked to memorize into images and distributing those images along familiar spatial journeys. They weren't doing this automatically or because it was an inborn talent they'd nurtured since childhood. Rather, the unexpected patterns of neural activity that Maguire's fMRIs turned up were the result of training and practice. All right, so now let's go ahead and get started going through the questions. All right, according to the passage, Maguire's findings regarding taxi drivers are significant because they what? Well, we know that ultimately what her findings showed with the taxi drivers is that they had a different brain, right? Or not in the sense that it was completely different, but that one area was 7% enlarged. Okay, so why was this significant? Well, if I go ahead and scroll up, I can show you why. And we need evidence for the next question anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and show you this. It was significant because that contrasted what was typically expected, right? So I'm going to go ahead and highlight what I'm looking at here. So I find where I had that 7% change or 7% difference than the normal brain. And now I got to find why that's significant, right? Well, I see that that's ultimately going to be significant right here. When we say it had long been thought that the adult brain was incapable of spawning new neurons, that while learning causes synapses to rearrange themselves and new links between brain structures and cells to form, the brain's basic anatomical structure was more or less static. Maguire's study suggested the old inherited wisdom was simply not true. And that's ultimately what's important from this study with the cab drivers, right? It's showing that what was something that was long believed, right, this first highlighted portion, is now being looked at again because it doesn't look like it's actually true based on this study. So ultimately what it's doing is it's contrasting this old wisdom and saying it isn't correct. Okay, so that's going to be lines that looks like 20 to right around 26 is what I'd be looking at for my evidence there. Okay, so I see I have that in answer choice D, so D would be my answer for 43, and my answer for 42, let's go ahead and run through. We have option A, demonstrate the validity of a new method. No. B, provide evidence for a popular viewpoint. No. C, call into question an earlier consensus. Yes, we're calling into question what was long believed before, which is that the human brain cannot be changed from its fundamental structure. So we know our answer's got to be C for 42. Okay, we're not challenging any authenticity of previous data because there's no data included there. All right, 44. As used in line 24, basic most nearly means what? Well, let's go to line 24. I'll go ahead and highlight this in, we'll do green so you can see it easier. Okay, it's line 24. The word we're looking at is basic. All right, so we're going to start from the beginning of the sentence as I recommend you do. It had long been thought that the adult brain was incapable of spawning new neurons, that while learning caused synapses to rearrange themselves and the new links between brain cells form. The brain's basic anatomical structure was more or less static. Well, in this case, we're going to want to use some context clues, right? Saying that the brain structure is more or less static, that's just saying that it doesn't change. And when we say the brain's basic anatomical structure doesn't change, we're referring to, the standard brain structure that before this study, scientists thought every single person had, okay? So it's not that a brain didn't change from birth, or it's not that it never grew. It's that they thought that the structure of it had never changed. So in this case, we wouldn't say initial because obviously the brain can grow, but they expect the structure to remain the same. So when we say basic here, we're not referring to whether something is young, old, whether it's initial versus something else. We're referring to the standard state. Now, we're not referring to a simple state, right? We're not describing the brain structure as simple. In fact, the brain's incredibly complex. Here, what basic means is it's just referring to, the structure of the brain that they thought all humans had. They thought all humans had that same structure. It's not necessary because, obviously you need a brain, but in this case, when we're modifying the brain structure, we wouldn't describe it as necessary. We're describing it as fundamental, right? We want to show that that brain structure that we're referring to, that fundamental, that basic structure, is the same in all people, okay? At least that's what they thought. So we're referring to the fundamental structure of the brain, or the basic structure of the brain. So that's why D is our answer there for 44. All right, 45. Which question was McGuire's study of mental athletes primarily intended to answer? Well, once they found this difference in the space of the brain, and keep in mind, I'll go ahead and show you the evidence for this as well, since 46 is the next one. Remember that once they found this study with the London cab riders, they moved on to study these mental athletes. And why did they do that? Well, I'll go ahead and highlight this in green as well here. They wanted to do that because they wanted to figure out if the reason that these professional memorizers are able to remember everything is because it's a structure of their brain, or if they're just making better use of the memory abilities we all possess. So as we can see, that's coming where we make this transition into our discussion of the study and the experiment with the professional memorizer. So I highlighted this in green, and what you can see there is that we have the goal of their experiment, right? They even pretty much explicitly state it. They say they wanted to find out if the memorizers' brains were, like the London cabbies, structurally different from the rest of ours, if they were somehow just making better use of the memory abilities we all possess. So in this case, they're explicitly telling us the goal of their experiment. So that's pretty much giving us our answer really directly for 45. And I'm going to go ahead and go up here and figure out my lines as well, since the next question is evidence. I see it's going to be 33 to 38. So that's what I'm looking for my evidence there. I can go and see if that's here. 33 to 37, that's just as good, okay? Keep in mind, I might have even just miscounted. I did miscount. That actually should be 37. Okay, so that's perfect. Now, going down to answer the question before it now, we have which question was McGuire's study of mental athletes primarily intended to answer? We have option A, does the act of memorization make use of different brain structures than does the act of navigation? No. B, do mental athletes inherit unusual brain structures, or do they develop as a result of specific activities? This is incorrect because we don't care whether or not they inherited it or if it developed. That's not the goal of our study, right? So that's why B is incorrect for those two reasons there. And then C, does heightened memorization ability reflect abnormal brain structure or an unusual use of a normal brain structure? Yes. Those are the two parts, are the two goals of that experiment. Okay, they're explicitly stated in those lines that we circled for our answer in 46. So as we can see, C will clearly be our answer in 45, and B will be our evidence for it in 46. All right, number 47 now. As used in line 39, matched most nearly means what? Well, we're going to go up to line, I believe it said 39, and we have matched right there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and erase what I had previously here so you can see this easier. I'll go ahead and highlight this in green. Matched right here, okay? So the researchers put both the mental athletes and a group of matched control subjects into MRI scanners and asked them to memorize 3-digit numbers, black and white photographs, people's faces, and magnified images of snowflakes while their brains were being scanned. Now, if you have control subjects, and if any of you guys have taken AP Bio or a biology class, you hopefully know what a control subject is. It's something that's being used to compare to the subjects that you are making a change upon, okay, or that you're measuring, that you're making a change upon, right? So your control is ultimately what you're measuring against from what you made a change with. Okay, so if we have a pair of matched control subjects, we want them to be completely similar to our mental athletes, except for one difference. In this case, the difference is just that one is mental athletes and the other are just normal people, but they probably have similar health characteristics, right? So in this case, when we say matched control subjects, we're talking about control subjects that are similar to the mental athletes. So if we go down to our answer choices, we should have something along the lines of similar. Okay, so in this case, we have matched most nearly means what? Well, they're not identical because there are obviously going to be different people. And then we have option C, distinguishable. Well, we know that they're distinguishable. We want to show that they are similar, okay? Because we want to show that it's fair to use these control subjects because they're similar in health or in age to these these professional memorizers, right? They're not competing with each other, but they are comparable, right? They're similar for a reason. They're similar and comparable because that's what you need in a control subject. So that's a key thing to understand with control subjects for the SAT reading section, especially on science passages. All right, now 48. The main purpose of the fifth paragraph, lines 57 to 65, is to what? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at that paragraph, 57 to 65. So I'll go ahead and highlight this in green so you can see it. But there was one telling difference between the brains of mental athletes and control. And then we're talking about the brain lighting up in the mental athletes and how the area of the brain that was lighting up is completely different in the mental athletes versus the control subjects, right? We see that the less active areas of the brain in control subjects were working in overdrive for the mental athletes. So the big revelation that we had in that paragraph is that we now realize, okay, these professional memorizers, their brains are the same as their control subjects. They're not fundamentally different, or they're not just different at this point, but they're just using different parts of it. Okay, so we're going to find an answer choice that reflects that. So we have option A, relate McGuire's study of mental athletes to her study of taxi drivers. It doesn't appear like that would be our answer right off the bat. I'm going to put a mark next to it. I'll see if I can eliminate it later on. B, speculate on the reasons for McGuire's unexpected results. No, that's way off. C, identify an important finding of McGuire's study on mental athletes. Yes, that's perfect. Okay, ultimately we are making that important finding, which is that they are using a different part of their brain more than their control subjects, okay? And that's why they're able to remember things better. So that's why C is our answer. To touch again on why A is incorrect here, that says relate McGuire's study of mental athletes to her study of taxi drivers. In this case, we aren't making any relation between the two, okay? In this case, what we're actually doing is identifying that important finding, which is that they're using a different part of their brain more actively than the control. And then option D, transition from a summary to a description, we're not doing that. So that's why D is incorrect there. 49, according to the passage, when compared to mental athletes, the individuals in the control group in McGuire's second study, what? All right, well, the individuals in the control group, like I just said, they were using a different part of their brain. Okay, we just saw that when I was back in the text there. So we have option A, showed less brain activity overall. No, they had similar brain activity levels, just in different areas of the brain. And then B, demonstrated a wider range of cognitive ability. No, okay, keep in mind that their cognitive abilities was stated as being very similar, and that's why they were used as control subjects. C, exhibited different patterns of brain activity. Yes, they were using different areas of their brain. So that's why C is correct there. And then D, displayed noticeably smaller hippocampal regions. No, we know that their hippocampal regions were the same, or at least very close to each other in the professional memorizers and the control group. All right, and then 50, the passage most strongly suggests that mental athletes are successful at memorization because they what? Well, this is really explicitly stated, and I'm guessing we have evidence for the next question because it's so explicit, and we do. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the text and show you the answer for this as well. So at the end of the day, right, where we're showing why these mental athletes are so good at memorization, it's not because of the any sort of structural differences in their brain. It's really coming, I believe, in this last paragraph, if I remember correctly. Let's go and take a look. McGuire and her team asked mental athletes to describe what was going through their mind as they memorized. They said that they were consciously converting the information into images and distributing those images along familiar spatial journeys. They weren't doing this automatically or because it was an inborn talent that they nurtured since childhood, rather the unexpected patterns of neural activity that McGuire's fMRI has turned up, the result of training and practice. So the reason they're able to remember everything is because of training and practice. And as for the lines for evidence, okay, it would appear to me that our evidence lines are probably going to be, looks like right around 85 to what should be 89. Okay, that last portion there. So we'll go ahead and go down here. Oh, and I'm also going to have to answer 50 here, so just give me one moment. Okay, 85 to 87. Okay, so I'm going to go back up and check 85 to 87 in a minute, just make sure that that would be good lines here. So we have they weren't doing this automatically or because it was an inborn talent they'd nurtured since childhood. That's not great evidence, so I'm actually going to take a look at potentially some other lines. But let's go ahead and answer 50 a minute. So the passage most strongly suggests that mental athletes are successful at memorization because they what? We have option A, exploit parts of the brain not normally used in routine memorization. Yes, that's why they have that edge. Okay, they're using that part of the brain that the London cabbie used to go around. They're using that visualization part of their brain, so that's why A is correct there. Option B, convert information that they're trying to memorize into abstract symbols. No, they're not breaking it down into abstract symbols. They're breaking it down into clear pictures. C, organize information into numerical lists. They're not doing that. They're creating pictures. And then D, exercise their brains regularly through puzzles. That's way off, so that's why D is incorrect there. All right, now going to support for 51 here. So support for 50, we can take a look then at 79 to 81, 72 to 73. And keep in mind, if you ever come up with, an answer choice for evidence and then you find, okay, I got to look somewhere else, that's totally fine. Just make sure you don't panic. So in this case, we'll take a look at 72, I believe it said, to 73. At first glance, this wouldn't seem to make any sense. Is that what the lines were? Let me go down and check a minute. Okay, so that's not going to be right because that's way too narrow. It's not providing any evidence. I don't believe D will be correct for 51. So let me take a look at C and A then. So C, McGuire and memorized, so 79 to 81. All right, taking a look at 79, we have McGuire and her team asked the mental athletes to describe exactly what was going through their minds as they memorized. That's not providing any evidence there. So I'm going to be between A, and I might come back and answer D here if I don't see anything good in A. So we have surprisingly to wayfinding. All right, so that's 66 to 72. So let me go up. So we have surprisingly, when the mental athletes were learning new information, they were engaging several regions of the brain known to be involved in two specific tasks: visual memory and spatial navigation, including the same right posterior hippocampal region that the London cabbies had enlarged with all their daily wayfinding. So here we see that they are using regions of their brain known to be involved in visual memory and spatial navigation, which most people are not. Okay, so that is going to be our evidence there. That's perfect. So going down here, that's going to be answer choice A for number 51. Okay, so that's perfect right there. That's really explicit evidence for what came before as far as them using those two different areas of their brain that aren't normally used in routine memorization. Okay, and then 52, the questions in lines 74 to 78 primarily serve to do what? Going back up to 74 and 78, we'll see what's included there. Okay, we're asking questions there. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight this in green so you can see it easier. Let me remove this. Okay, this is where we're asking these questions. Why would mental athletes be conjuring images in their mind's eye when they were trying to learn three-digit numbers? Why should they be navigating like London cabbies when they're supposed to be remembering the shapes of snowflakes? So this is where the researchers get puzzled. Okay, they're very curious as to why they're seeing that these professional memorizers are using the same parts of their brain that are used by the cabbies, right? They're questioning this. They are unsure. So at that point in the text, that's marking that transition from us talking about an experiment and its results to us having questions, and then after that we go on and answer them. So let's go ahead and take a look at 52, find an answer choice that talks about us asking these questions, how the researchers are uncertain at this point in the passage. So we have option A, raise doubts about the reliability of the conclusions. No, we're not raising doubts. We just have questions about, why. Our questions here are why, but we're not doubtful about our results. And then we have B, emphasize and elaborate on an initially puzzling, or something that we're questioning, result of McGuire's study of mental athletes. And yes, that's perfect, right? We're emphasizing and elaborating because we are confused, we are puzzled as to why these professional memorizers are ultimately using the part of their brain that is associated with visual memory and navigating spaces. And then option C, imply that McGuire's findings undermine earlier studies of the same phenomenon. No. And then D, introduce and explain a connection between McGuire's two studies and her earlier work. Both of those are pretty far off.
Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, make sure to like and subscribe. In addition to that, if you're looking to donate or if you're looking for my website where I offer private SAT prep, college essay brainstorming, and college essay editing, then be sure to check out the links in the description.